You know, have you ever walked down a street, maybe a crowded commercial one or a quiet little residential road, and you just get this feeling, like an immediate, I don't know, a sense of comfort? Or maybe the opposite, this sort of low-level stress. It's not just what you see, it's how it sounds. For decades, we've treated city sound as just noise, something to get rid of. But today, we're going way beyond just decibel readings to understand the full urban soundscape.
That subconscious feeling you're talking about, that's exactly what this huge 2025 scoping review is trying to formalize. Our main source today is a study by Ozturk, Kang, and Aletta, and it looks specifically at soundscape research on streets. And they found something critical. Streets, which are the circulatory system of a city, are actually underexplored, especially when you compare them to, say, parks or big city squares.
So our mission for this deep dive is pretty straightforward. We're going to distill the key findings, the methods they're using, and maybe most importantly, the big knowledge gaps this review found. We want to give you a fast track to understanding this field so you can start to recognize why some streets just feel better than others.
And this review is so important because it really captures this massive paradigm shift in how we think about urban sound. I mean, historically, noise was just the enemy, a nuisance.
Something to be engineered away.
Exactly. You put up a wall, a barrier, problem solved. But the soundscape movement, which this review tracks through 16 key studies, is about appreciating how diverse sounds, cafe chatter, a fountain, can actually enhance our well-being.
So it's not just about physics anymore, how loud it is.
No, it's about psychoacoustics. How does it make me feel?
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. Before we get into the findings, what were the boundaries? What criteria did they use to pick those 16 papers?
They did a really systematic synthesis. The final list, covering papers from 2000 to early 2025, had a very strict rule. Every single study had to be about the perception of outdoor street soundscapes, and it had to have a verifiable sample size of participants.
So we're talking about human-centered studies, not just sticking a microphone on a lamppost. What were the big themes that popped up from those 16 studies?
Well, the initial findings confirmed what you might expect. Soundscapes were looked at through two main, sort of intertwined concepts. First was noise, annoyance. That was in 6 studies, basically trying to measure discomfort. But the bigger concept in 14 of the studies was just sound perception more broadly. And this wasn't just about loudness. It was almost always about distinguishing between sounds people thought were pleasant versus, well, unpleasant.
And that sets up the fundamental conflict of any urban street, doesn't it? The sounds you want to hear versus the sounds that feel like an invasion. Let's get into that core contrast. Natural sounds versus traffic sounds.
That contrast is the foundational DNA of this whole field of science. When they looked at sound sources, natural elements were consistently the positive ones. Things like birdsong, running water, the rustle of trees. They're always linked to feelings of tranquility, relaxation, and what they call acoustic comfort.
It's like a little mental escape. I know birdsong specifically was a huge factor.
A huge factor. Birdsong has been shown again and again to significantly reduce noise annoyance.
Yeah.
Even when there's a lot of traffic around, it's like a natural acoustic masking agent. And what's more, natural sounds can actually significantly motivate pedestrians to spend more time in a place.
So if nature is the positive, then the negative has to be traffic noise. But the review got more specific than just engine rumble.
That's right. Traffic is, of course, perceived negatively. But the nuance was in which sounds were the most irritating. It wasn't the steady hum of engines that bothered people most. It was the sudden, intense noises.
Horns and sirens.
Exactly. Horns and sirens. They consistently top the charts for irritation and stress response way more than just general mechanical noise.
That makes sense. I mean, those are aggressive sounds. They signal an emergency or conflict.
And their impact on comfort is just massive. Traffic noise in general is the primary source of annoyance. In some of the areas they studied, it was exceeding 75 decibels during peak tourist seasons.
Okay, 75 dBs. That's a number that doesn't mean much to most people. Can you put that in context for us?
Sure. Imagine a loud vacuum cleaner running right next to you, continuously, or the noise inside a busy subway car. When you're exposed to that level for a long time, it's not a vibrant soundscape anymore. It's just sonic fatigue.
So trying to fix that constant drone isn't just about city regulations. It's more like a public health issue. Acoustic comfort is urban health.
Precisely. The research links it directly to how safe you feel, how relaxed you are, your mental well-being. When you feel acoustically stressed, your whole experience of the city suffers. And the review says treating this isn't optional. It's fundamental to a healthy street perspective.
Now, this is where it gets really, really interesting for me. Because the review didn't just look at what people hear. It looked at what they see. I always thought of them as separate, but seeing the data connect them so strongly that what you see is a huge part of the sound experience that changes everything for urban design. How big is that visual influence?
It's substantial. So much so that researchers are concluding that sound and sight are pretty much inseparable when it comes to perceived quality. The second big question in the review was all about the impact of visual streetscape features, and the results were clear. What you see profoundly changes how you process what you hear.
So, what were the visual features they studied the most? What had the biggest impact on sound comfort?
Unsurprisingly, natural and vegetative elements were the runaway winner. They were mentioned in 9 of the 16 studies, so we're talking greenery like tree canopies, flowers, vegetation,
Hmm.
and also water features like fountains. They're consistently linked to positive perceptions, feeling restored, and just high aesthetic value. One study found that adding natural features dramatically changed both psychological and physiological responses in those dense street canyons, especially when you paired them with sounds like birdsong.
So, the takeaway for a planner is if you can't get rid of the traffic, add a tree and a fountain. That seems intuitive. But what about the concrete and steel? What about architectural features?
That brings us to street scale, or geometry. Researchers looked at the height-to-width ratio, the HW ratio, especially in what they call urban street canyons,
Hmm.
and the results showed this really complex trade-off. A high HW ratio, so a tall, narrow street, was positive for a feeling of enclosure.
That kind of cozy, protected feeling.
Right, but, and this is critical, it was negatively related to pleasantness.
I see the conflict there immediately. So designing for density, which often means tall buildings on narrow streets, might look interesting, but it's actively bad for acoustic comfort. Why is that?
It's basically the physics of an echo chamber. When that canyon is too deep and narrow, all those sounds, traffic, horns, just the general hum, they have nowhere to go. They get trapped, they reflect over and over, and it amplifies the background noise. It turns a vibrant space into an acoustic stressor. So an architect designing for that cozy, enclosed look has to consider the acoustic cost.
The built environment can either help or hurt. What about traffic management? Can changing the rules, not just the buildings, make a difference?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
The studies that look at traffic policies found that restrictions had a really clear positive effect. Areas that were pedestrianized or even just low-emission zones were perceived as much calmer, less chaotic. And fascinatingly, one study even showed that people felt that just adding road humps made the street quieter, suggesting that the visual cue of slower traffic can itself lower your acoustic stress.
It's that psychological signal of slowing down. Now let's talk multisensory stuff. I was completely surprised by that counterintuitive finding about smell.
Ah, yes, the odor study. Your intuition would say that a nice smell, like a bakery or flowers, would make you more forgiving of noise. Yeah.
Of course.
But Study 15 tested this directly, and they found that the pleasantness of odors, even strong, positive ones like rose scent, did not affect noise, annoyance, how loud people thought it was, or their overall pleasantness rating of the street.
So why do sight and sound just dominate smell in this context?
The evidence seems to suggest that when you're judging a street, which is often about moving safely and quickly, your vision and hearing are your primary tools. They give you instant information about threats or aesthetics. Smell, while it's powerful for memory, seems to take a back seat in that real-time judgment of the environment.
That's a huge takeaway. Finally, how stable are these perceptions? Do they change with the seasons?
They change significantly. Seasonal changes were found to have a dramatic impact on what people prefer. In warmer weather, pedestrians want natural sounds. They want to see lush greenery. But in the winter, that preference shifts. People start to favor human-centered visuals, like festive decorations or the sounds of social activities. The desire for restorative nature is different in January than it is in June. In winter, we're looking for human vibrancy.
Which leads us right into methodology. If the goal is to build better streets, we need good data. So how are they generating these findings and where are the holes?
Well, the methodology showed a heavy reliance on controlled environments. Most studies use questionnaires, which is self-reporting, and lab-based setups. About 10 of the 16 use things like high-fidelity audio-visual simulations, or VR. And while that gives you control, it's still a step away from the real world.
And what about the people in these studies? You mentioned a limitation there.
Yes, the sample sizes were all over the place, from just 10 people to 1,200. But the review noted a crucial limitation. The studies overwhelmingly focused on healthy, young, or middle-aged adults. And if you're trying to design inclusive streets, getting your data from just one demographic is a major problem for generalizing your results.
And if we want to move beyond just asking people how they feel, we need objective, physiological proof of stress or comfort. Where are we on that front?
That is probably the biggest methodological gap they found. Only 4 out of the 16 studies used any physiological measurements. We're talking things like facial electromyography, FEMG, which tracks tiny muscle twitches that show stress, or just basic pulse and blood pressure.
So what the review is calling for is more advanced objective metrics then.
Exactly. It strongly emphasizes that we need more diverse physiological methods to get reliable evidence of emotional and behavioral changes. We need to see things like heart rate variability, HRV, which is a key measure of nervous system stress, or skin conductance level, SCL. If you only rely on what people say, you leave too much room for bias.
Which brings us to the critical knowledge gaps, the things we don't know. The review laid out 4 major categories. Let's start with the sounds we're ignoring.
The first is underrepresented sounds. Researchers have been so focused on that natural versus traffic fight that they're missing almost everything else. I mean, human sounds from cultural events, religious ceremonies, shops, or even just lively chatter. They're largely unexplored.
And I was shocked that micromobility sounds are being ignored too.
Completely ignored the specific sounds of electric scooters, bicycles in their own lanes, trams. None of it has been properly examined. And anyone who lives in a city knows that the whine of an e-scooter is a totally different sound from a car horn. It's a huge part of the modern soundscape we know nothing about.
Okay, second gap. The visual elements we're missing.
That's the underrepresented street features gap. We've talked about trees and the HW ratio, but there's a serious lack of data on things like street furniture benches, bus stops, or the road materials themselves, different building facades, and even lighting materials.
And those choices have massive acoustic implications.
Huge. If you switch to a quieter road surface, you've fundamentally changed the sound of that street. Planners make these choices every day, but their impact on soundscape quality is a total blind spot in the research.
The third gap is about traffic, but it's more dynamic.
Right, the dynamic gap. This is about the effect of vehicle speed. The review says we urgently need to study how a car's speed affects a pedestrian's stress and sound perception. A slow car signals safety, control. A fast car signals danger and stress, even if the decibel level is the same. We need to quantify that response.
And finally, we come back to the participants. What specific groups need to be included in future research?
That's the people gap. Future studies have to include groups with different sensitivities or who use streets differently. We're talking about the elderly, people with disabilities, and children. And on top of that, there's almost no research on how culture affects perception. What sounds signal vibrancy in Tokyo versus London versus Istanbul? We just don't know.
This entire review points to one really complicated lesson. Street soundscapes aren't just a side effect of city life. They are a complex dance of sight, sound, design, and policy. And the future of urban planning has to shift from just mitigating noise to actively, consciously designing for acoustic comfort.
And that idea of designing for health is really the final takeaway. The review brings up this concept of a healthy street perspective, which should judge a street on 10 different metrics, not just how many cars it can move. Things like noise, air quality, safety, accessibility. And bringing this human-centered soundscape idea into that framework is absolutely essential if we want our cities to actually support us.
So to wrap this up, we want to leave you with one final thought to take with you as you navigate your own city.
Imagine your daily routes. How could they be improved if planners stopped focusing only on traffic throughput and started prioritizing metrics like vibrancy or quietness? Think about the street you walk on most often. What's one specific physical thing you could add? Maybe a patch of greenery instead of concrete, a small water feature, or even just warmer lighting on the buildings. What one thing would most fundamentally change how you feel in that acoustic environment?
Go take a sound walk with fresh eyes and ears. You might be surprised by what you hear, and more importantly, what you realize you don't see. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.